Let's talk about the themes of Avatar Fire and Ash. Dee, I know you've been itching to get into how this film addresses colonialism. So go.
Again, this is a quote unquote anti-colonial film that is ultimately about accepting the colonizer's son, because apparently the colonizer's son is more important than the longevity of your community. Why? Because you're a poorly written indigenous coded character written by a white liberal man who didn't involve any indigenous people when writing this film.
Don't forget a white Australian man.
Australian? Isn't he Canadian?
Yes. Oh, is he Canadian?
Yeah, he's Canadian.
I'm sorry.
Which is even worse. But actually, it's on the same level,
Yeah.
right?
They're flirting with similar territory.
I'm not going to say there hasn't been any cultural input because, to be fair, there aren't many indigenous actors in this film, actually, which is one of my big problems with it. But there are some who are very vocal about the fact that they wanted to bring elements of their real life experiences to this project. I think my issue is whatever indigenous people or maybe people from former colonized countries have brought to this project, I highly suspect that James Cameron has been overriding it and that no one's telling this man no. So as someone who is very sympathetic to the theme of colonialism, and I would love to see this explored properly. And what really annoys me is I think this film would be a fantastic vehicle to actually have the nitty gritty conversations. As you said, I probably would have been more impressed if Jake did kill Spider, right? But it's so obvious that James Cameron just isn't willing to have that conversation. And it just leads me to conclude once again that this film is not about what he says it is about. It's not actually about exploring colonialism. It's not actually about trying to empower people of indigenous backgrounds or people living on territories that are being seized ultimately for capitalist endeavors. This is really about James Cameron and his obsession. And this is just a vehicle for him to explore that. And he's come up with a very flimsy story to enable him to do that. Unfortunately for him, for some bizarre reason, is connecting with a lot of people and it's making him billions of dollars at a time. What did you think?
I think I'm a bit more generous when it comes to Cameron's intentions than you, but I do know I have a bit of a blind spot with him because the first two Avatar movies are so important to me. You're not wrong in that the politics of this film on colonialism are crazy and wild, and a white liberal man who is obsessed with the concept of being embraced by indigenous people's wet dream. That is what's been from the first film, but this time it just got way more egregious because of the spider character
Yeah.
being so front and center. I don't really have much else to say. I don't disagree with you. I've been able to enjoy it, the technical part more, and now that I don't, it's just like don't as much. There's just a lot less to hold on to. Cameron, I don't know. Sometimes I think, is this man just like a white Tyler Perry with $1 billion? Because I very much get the impression when I'm watching some of these scenes, especially like things like the Whale Tribunal, I'm like, this man is in a room by himself writing this stuff. Maybe with an AI. And there's nobody else involved in this process.
Yes.
Like, there's no way there's any peer review involved in what I'm hearing. And also the narration that you hear in the film, because I think it's the son that's narrating in Fire and Ash, a terrible decision. It just makes an already too simplistic script feel even more simplistic. They're explaining everything to you for something that's already so simple. You don't need to explain it. I know you guys need to make $2 billion, so you need everybody, every family to come and watch it. I think families and kids can get it, guys. You don't actually need to spoon feed it to this much detail. Yeah, on the colonialism, I was just like, yeah, simplistic stuff, basic stuff. D, is Neytiri a racist in Avatar Fire and Ash?
No, of course not. It's perfectly reasonable to be angry at the group of people who are oppressing your people daily, who killed your children, who are taking your land on a daily basis.
I was stunned by how they've talked about it since then, and this whole concept of Neytiri being a racist and how outrageous it is that she hates her oppressor after they've murdered her child and are actively trying to murder the rest of her family and community. I feel like, what's going on here?
But what's really important about that is that both James Cameron and Zoe Saldaña have been they're on the record saying that Neytiri is a racist. I find it particularly wild for James Cameron to say that. Zoe Saldaña she can't really do anything to shock me these days. This is a woman who's been very explicit about the fact that she doesn't identify as Black. This is a woman, even though to me, well, it's up to you, race is ultimately about phenotype, right? In my context, she looks like a Black woman. And even though she's been explicit about not identifying as Black, she's been more than happy to put herself in roles that very clearly involve someone who is Black. So I don't really trust her when it comes to these sorts of topics. Anyway, and by the way, she's getting a lot of pushback for those comments. What I find more surprising is that James Cameron isn't getting the same pushback, because I'm like, you're a white man. And how dare you, basically? How dare you say that? How dare you? Because he's basically saying that a woman who is coded as Indigenous, right? And of course, in the real world, we have all the nasty context around the world of various Indigenous peoples who have lost their land, right? And this film seems to be simultaneously saying to them that you guys didn't fight enough. And in fact, he's even been on record saying that maybe this is what the world would look like if Indigenous people only fought harder. So you can't simultaneously say that, but then condemn Neytiri for being angry about the fact that these people are taking over her land. And something else I find interesting about this film is that they use the term pink skins very explicitly, right? And it's a reminder that James Cameron has made the deliberate choice to make the humans only pale skins, people who are presenting as white. And that's a deliberate choice. So for me, as somebody who's a Black person who comes from a background of people who were not only colonized but also enslaved by white people, I don't take it very lightly when, I don't care if it's James Cameron, Zoe Saldaña, some random on the internet, implies that somebody who's been colonized, somebody who's basically going to be enslaved, is wrong for hating their oppressor. Were my ancestors wrong for hating our oppressors?
On the subject of the pink skins and all the human invaders all being white, another layer of white that's interesting is that that's such a simplistic way of viewing how the US Army and Navy tends to be.
Right.
Black people and people of color are overrepresented in the armed forces in the US partly because of economic reasons.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So, like, in real life, if you had a Pandora-like situation going on, guess what? A lot of the US Army that's going to be there, they're going to be Black and brown and Asian people. If you look at the composition of ICE, you see stunning things. If you look at the people that get deployed to Iraq and Venezuela and places, it's not all lily white. So I suppose that the flattening of that racial dynamic is done on purpose for Cameron to make his points. But it actually kind of takes me out of it, because I'm like, yeah, it demonstrates again your understanding of race, class, and colonialism is unsophisticated.
Yeah.
It's more complicated than that, especially when you're dealing with a hegemon that has absorbed people of color into their ranks.
Yes.
I just find it funny every time they show the humans and they're all white in the US Army. I'm like, no, that's not how that works.
And the thing is, like, so I agree with you, but I think there's another layer to it as well, in that I understand why James Cameron has done it, but I really struggle with the fact that, like, the humans in this film are presented as white people, right? And the aliens are presented as everything except white. So, and that's another thing I don't like about this film. The Na'vi are basically a big conglomeration of various indigenous groups around the world. And I don't know, I know that the film is not trying to say that indigenous peoples are non-human or alien, but actually I'm not even that confident when it comes to James Cameron. There's something about portraying indigenous people and separating them from humanity that bugs me when it comes to this series, even though I know it's not the intention.
I think I understand what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
I can't really put it into words, but I understand what you're trying to say.
It's because of the historical precedent of that exact behavior, of trying to separate indigenous people from their humanity in order to take over their land. In this case, it's separating indigenous people from their humanity to make $1 billion. And this is an open question. I actually don't know if he does do anything with that money, but there's a part of me that's like, okay, so we're separating indigenous people from their humanity. We're not telling the stories properly. We're not communicating the real harms and dangers of colonialism properly. Because again, this film is about accepting the colonizer's son in a positive way. So it's like, okay, you're making all of this money from this. How are you really benefiting indigenous people? Because you're not hiring them, right? most of the actors are not indigenous here. There's a lot of race swapping going on.
He goes to the bottom of the Mariana Trench and he gives commentary when the Titan submersible implodes underwater.
Yeah. So it's just like, I don't know. I really struggle when it comes to this series. I really, really struggle with it. I struggle to say anything positive, to be honest.
On the subject of what are you doing with all the money, James Cameron is a famous conservationist. Like he does do like a lot of rich people. He has causes that he triumphs and he has foundations and stuff like that towards saving the Amazon and the rainforest and things like that. And I'm sure some of the money goes towards that, at least performatively. I don't really know what he ultimately does with the majority of his own personal wealth. But I won't say that he doesn't talk about these things in real life, even outside of the Avatar film cycles. He does. He does talk quite a bit about environmental conservation and all of that kind of stuff. But once again, I know what you mean.
But he brings the same narrow-minded approach that he does with this film.
I understand your perspective.